Love that story. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Scott. What I love about the format for tonight is that it lets us basically start with that story and then push past it, and to hear more about a couple areas. One is just want to talk to you more tonight, Scott, about charity water and charity more generally, and generosity and philanthropy. Want to talk about that, and then also I think want to talk to you about a bit more about your personal narrative and your purpose and how you see that. So you've talked about, this is an amazing story, and in many ways it like mirrors how we think about in the startup world, like what that founding story is like. Would love to hear from you about how storytelling has been a part of what Charity Water has been all about.
Yeah. How's everyone doing? I've had to see that video way too many times. Storytelling is just such a part of our culture. We love telling stories. I mean, everyone we hire has an affinity for story, and I think we see stories in unlikely places than other organizations. So I'll give you an example. We used to drill a well live on our anniversary every single year. And I started this off on the first year when I donated my birthday, and I wasn't sure if it would work. But I said, if I reach my goal, I will fly to Africa with a satellite unit, and I'll drill the well that everybody paid for with the birthday donations. And we kept doing that for year after year. And then one of these years, we found ourselves in the Central African Republic. And what we loved about that was every year we got to tell a completely new story of a new country, of a new partner, a new context for water. So we find ourselves in the Central African Republic, and we're with the Bayaka Pygmies, which was really marginalized people group. The logging companies had cut down the trees, and they'd fled the forests, and had actually become enslaved by the tall Central Africans. So we had a local partner there who was trying to bring them equality by giving them water in the Central African waters. So we're all the way in the middle of this village, on the Congo border. It was maybe 16 hours drive from Bangui, the capital, and the village has been waiting for water its entire life. There was a failed attempt 8 years previous, and we're now going in and we're going to drill live, and we're going to be the heroes. And this well was crowdsourced by kids, doing lemonade stands and birthdays. So we drill, and there's no water. It collapses, so we get quicksand in this village. And we then drill all the way through the night, again, in another location. Same thing, just quicksand. And we, the next day, leave the village, no better than we found it, with hundreds of Bayaka watching our drilling rigs leave. And I remember being there on the ground, and there were a couple people on the team that said, well, you cannot broadcast that. I mean, you can't share what's going on. I'm like, oh no, we're going to share this. This is going to be the best story we've ever told in 7 years. Yeah. So we broadcast the failure and the disappointment of this community, and it's, the video goes crazy, and, people are watching it, they're crying, and the story spoke to the value, really, which it's hard work. And not everything works all the time, and people sometimes expect their charities to be perfect. Well, as you know, it's not perfect. I'll give you one other example of storytelling. We were just we crowdsourced 2 drilling rigs in Ethiopia. They cost $1 million each, and our local partner there crashes the drilling rig, and doesn't tell us immediately because it's going to take them 4 weeks to repair the drilling rig and put it back in service, and they were kind of embarrassed. So I find out about this, because as you do find out about it, that we have a drilling rig, that, we've done this huge public campaign, 10,000 people paid for this drilling rig, and its 8 wheels are up in the sky. I'm like, send the team now. Get me photo and video of the rig busted so I can send it to the 10,000 people. Yeah. Because that's a story. That speaks to the tenacity of our partners. Yeah. They are not drilling wells by the paved roads. They took the rig into a remote area. They probably should not have been on that road, and the road collapsed. So I was going to say, we got there too late. They'd already put it back in service. But I think we just think everything is a story worth telling that can speak to some value, In that case, tenacity, perseverance, and the fact that like people here have been in accidents. You know, we get in car crashes. We have problems with machinery. Charities do too.
Yeah. Well, I'd say this is, of course, the story of Charity Water itself, right, is an incredible story, and $250 million later, and, countless lives, well, actually counted, lives that you've impacted. And, there's has it always been this kind of rocket ship, right? So you talk about the challenging stories. Have you had that, like, many startups go through, like, the existential moment, right, when you're like, oh my goodness, is this thing actually going to work? Actually, they go through it again and again and again. But are there those moments, not at the, as you're drilling in Africa, but as you're sitting in Manhattan and thinking about, is this thing actually going to work? Have you had those moments?
Yeah. Well, the organization started in a very unlikely place, which was this loft in Soho, New York. And I was living, so nightclub promoters are not great at saving money. We are fantastic at spending money, as maybe you could tell by that video. So when I went to Mercy Ships, I'd sold everything that I owned. I remember putting up 2,000 DVDs in a lot on eBay when they were actually worth something. And I paid Mercy Ships $500 a month to serve, and gave pretty much I gave everything I had to them and the people I met around the way. So I came back completely broke. Found out that I was $30,000 in debt because my club partner had never disbanded the company and hadn't paid any taxes. So this is bad news. It's not a good time to start a charity. So he said, I'll let you live on my walk-in closet floor because I feel bad that I don't have $30,000 to give you right now, and you can start the charity from the couch. So it starts in the most, and he was doing drugs at the time. This is not how you want to start a nonprofit. But we did, and we had a living room, and I had a roof over my head, and his clothes were everywhere. That was the bedroom, and it just kind of exploded. I think from that first party, it was up and to the right. I think a year and a half in, we'd raised a few $1 million. So the 100% model was resonating with people. We heard so many people saying they were giving to charity for the first time in their life. And that was what I was after. I wasn't after World Vision donors or Compassion donors or United Way donors. I wasn't after kind of the people who were already giving in belief of the system. I was after the 70% of people who were recently polled and thought charities waste money or badly waste money. So that was the demographic. So it worked really well, except when we started with the 100% model, people said, well, this is the dumbest thing we've ever heard of. Because only billionaires... Paul Tudor Jones started a charity called the Robin Hood Foundation. He was a billionaire, and he had the money to bankroll the endowment and all the staff. And you can't bootstrap a 100% model. You will go bankrupt. You will not be able to afford an office. So I don't know why. I just had this blind faith that this was meant to be, and I opened up 2 separate bank accounts with $100 in each of them. And things went great in the one bank account. So a year and a half in, we had somehow scrapped together enough money for the overhead. There was no health insurance. There was no dental. People were taking pay cuts to come and work at the organization. I think we had 8 or 9 employees at the time. And we were about to miss payroll and miss rent. So it was kind of, we thought we'd squeezed every last overhead drop out of anyone we knew at the time. And yet... we had $881,000 in the bank account that we couldn't touch, that was allocated for the water projects. So what advice do you think I was getting at the time? Borrow from the $880,000. Like, you got to pay your people. These people had left, many of them had left successful careers and given up salary and benefits to be a part of the organization. So I guess it was a logical enough argument. You could write an IOU to that account. Those wells could be built later. I thought, absolutely not. If we took 1 penny of the public's money that was allocated for water projects, our integrity would be compromised. There would be a crack in the foundation. We might as well all resign in shame and flee the country. I was that extreme about it. So I was going to unwind the charity. So I began preparing. You don't go bankrupt. You just kind of dissolve the charity. So we were going to send out the $880,000 to our partners, get as many of those water projects done as possible, and then I guess I would cry business model failure. I was praying at the time, I remember, with very little faith. I thought absolutely nothing was going to happen. And at that moment, a complete stranger walks into our office for a meeting, and we spent 2 hours together. I thought this guy didn't like me. Turned out later he was just British, and just was kind of dry, and so it actually did go okay.
Yeah.
It was confusing. He just didn't say much. He left that 2-hour meeting, and I remember being transparent in that meeting and saying, "Look, I have this vision to reinvent charity. We're reaching people, who would never give, but yet I can't raise the overhead money fast enough." And it's about to end. So he leaves the meeting and says, "Let me think about how to help." 2 days later, I'm on my laptop. I remember exactly where I was. It was after midnight, and I'm just stressed, and I feel like I've let everyone down. And I get an email from Michael, and he says, "It was great meeting you. I've just wired $1 million into your overhead account." So I log on to Commerce Bank at the time, and there it is, 1,000,000. And I freak out. I start crying. I call our 8 staff members. It was 1 in the morning, 1:15 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning. Wake everyone up. I'm like, "We got $1 million." So we went from we went from dead to 13 months of funding, and what we needed was the extra time, that runway to work out the business model. And I think Michael. He's been. He's very close now. We've been to 9 or 10 countries together with his children, and he's actually given $15 million since then. Over the last 8 years, so it wasn't a one and done. But in as much as it was the money at that moment, it was really that someone believed in me. It was the confidence that someone said, you're on to something here, you're about to blow it up, but you need more time. And that, I think, gave us the confidence to then go out and much more boldly ask families to pay for staff, overhead, rent, office, toner, copy machines.
Yeah. So
it wasn't, and then it went up again like crazy. And I think 90% growth year over year on average, 160%. And by the way, charitable giving over that time was down. This was the economic meltdown. So we were kind of our graph. It was just up and to the right for 8 consecutive years.
So what's next, right? So that's the graph from here, and I don't mean what's next in terms of the dollars, but what's next for you as you think about the next 5 years, 10 years, what Charity Water is?
Well, I'll tell you, in our 9th year, so our 8th year, 2014, because this leads into what's next, we had our best year ever. It was one of those years where everything went right. Twitter IPO'd, the CTO dropped $1 million. Senior executive at Apple came to Ethiopia with me, gave $1 million. Huge corporate foundation calls up, gives $5 million. Donor in Virginia calls up, gives $3 million on top of kind of the core organization. So we give 1 million people clean water. We raise almost $45 million. And then, at this point, we have built an organization that starts at 0 every January 1. So there's no sponsored child model. There's no kind of subscription product at all. It's just one-time birthdays. People do one birthday and then they move on. So the world gets uglier for these people in 2015. Our donor in Virginia stock goes down 40%. He goes from 3 million to 0. The corporate foundation announces they're laying off 10,000 employees. They go from 5 to 0. And we start off the year $8 million in the hole. We end about there. So we have our first year where Charity Water didn't grow. That's all we do. Like, we always grow. I don't know anything else. So I'm ready to fire myself. I call up the board. I have 7 or 8 board conversations and say, I think it's time for me to bring on a professional CEO. I've taken it as far as I can. I'm going to stay with the organization. I'll speak. I'll give me chief water boy title. I don't know. I'll figure out how to go innovate or still fundraise and spend time with our donors. But now it's time to bring on a professional. So this is going into Q4. So the board is very supportive and says, okay. I sit down with my executive team and get back to work. Literally, they're like, it's Q4, we have to raise. Absolutely not. So they said, there's no way you were opening up a CEO search in Q4. You're burned out. Why don't you take a month off with your family? So I took a month off in January. The year was outside of that missing kind of chunk of money. It was the most successful year on every other metric for the organization, from programs for sustainability, for innovation, the talent that we were able to acquire. So I take January off, and I'm thinking about what's next, and I just got really bored taking a month off. I was in California, went there with the family, and I really wanted to come back to work and solve some of these problems. So I came back, and I never really looked back. I said, well, I at least need to finish out our decade. We need to finish out our 10th year. I want to end 10 years strong, and then maybe, if I still feel this way, the following January, we can open up a CEO search. So all that to say, it was an awesome year last year. It was I've never had more fun trying to address some of these challenges. And at the moment, I'm looking at the next 10 years, unless they fire me or drag me out screaming. I don't know. So I'm really excited to continue growing the organization, to help more people. Some of the technology that we've been inventing now, I think can be used laterally, so outside of the organization. So we're about to fly to Africa and take some very, very high-level president meetings to talk about rolling out a sensor countrywide, where a country could map every single water point, not charity water points, not government water points, not UNICEF, every single water point, because we open source the whole thing. So that stuff really excites me.
Yeah. Well, you talk about technology, and that obviously you've used technology a lot. This is a town that thinks a lot about technology, whether it makes your personal computer work better or you can read anywhere that you want to be. Talk a little bit more about what you think, what role you think technology's played in Charity Water, and then also what you think it will enable for you in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's a huge part of who we are, and there's a culture of early adoption at the organization. There's a culture, innovation is a key value. And when we start, a lot of it was just good timing, though. So Charity Water started the same year as Google Earth. So Google had built this place where we could put every water point we would ever fund and live out our value of hyper-transparency, very simply, just through a GIS data set. So that's true today, guys. Any of you could go to REI, buy a $50 handheld GPS device, and visit 24,000 water projects in 24 countries. That terrifies people, by the way, that we have made, we've put ourselves out there. Certainly not every single one is working, but we've put that whole data set out there. When VR came around, so I saw very early VR stuff 2 years ago and said to myself, this is going to be used for porn and gaming, for sure. Yes. What if it could be used to evoke deep compassion and empathy? And what if it could be used for humanitarian narrative storytelling? So I changed all of Charity Water's creative priorities that year. We put a rig together with 8 GoPros and a bunch of duct tape, kind of literally. And we worked with Chris Milk and his company, which he's changed the name of 4 or 5 times now. So I think it's Within is the latest. And I wanted to document a 13-year-old girl in Ethiopia getting clean water for the first time in her life. And I have a very specific vision for what this film would look like. It would cover the 6 days, and it would. What I was so excited about with the technology was, in a distracted world, there's a moment of time, and I don't know how long this window is, that people are going to be willing to let me strap a movie set to their face and put away their phone. You can't be on VR and have your phone. Yeah. So it's total concentration. So I was actually more interested in being able to intravenously deliver stories to people without distraction than actually anything else. So we shoot this film. It looked kind of terrible because it was shot on GoPro and there just wasn't any, none of the new cameras were out. And we stitched the whole thing together. And then we have this beautiful moment. Maybe the whole thing cost $100,000. We got a grant. We got it paid for. And then we had this beautiful moment where a donor walks into the office and, great story, guy had Googled good charities, donated $20,000 online after finding us. A year and a half later, gets his photos and GPS of his water projects, calls up the office and says, well, I really like that experience. Now I'm going to give $200,000. Now, no one has met this guy. You just talk to someone on the phone. So he gives $200,000, and Nicole in our department says, well, maybe you should come in, since you're on the East Coast, and actually see that this place exists. Like, it's a real charity. So he comes in, and I meet him for a half hour, and I just thank him. He comes in to be thanked, to see that it's real. And I said, on your way out, you should check out this VR film, because $150,000 of your money is going to bring clean water to 15 of these villages. So I don't see this, but he walks out into the next room. He puts on the VR film that we have just made, and he watches it, and he takes the glasses down, weeping. He throws his wallet on the table, and he writes another $400,000 check. 40 more villages.
Wow. We
then took it to our gala, and for years we've been trying to innovate in the gala space. And we never did a sit-down dinner. I hate the rubber chicken, the boring dinners. You guys have probably been to these things, and the PowerPoints that just go on forever, and they're painful. So I said, we're never going to do a sit-down dinner. So as we got to our 9th year, I said, maybe we should do a sit-down dinner, but how could we innovate? Yeah. So I thought, well, what if right after dinner we strap 400 VR headsets on everybody, and we press play in synchronicity, and then the minute they came back from Ethiopia 8 minutes later, we asked them all for money. So we raised $3 million. It worked. Nice. So I think, this year we used technology at the same gala. It was really one of the ideas I'm most proud of. We had the same 400 people. It's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York for our sit-down dinner. And I wanted to connect every single person coming to the gala with the story of a person living in a village without water. Yeah. So we sent our creative team to Ethiopia. We found a village with 400 people, and we spent weeks documenting every single life in the village. There was a photo station. We had amazing photographers and lighting in the middle of the plains of Ethiopia, and we are trying to photograph everyone just in their most heroic state. Then there's a video editing station, there's an interview station. So we come back with 400 stories, and then we load them all into 400 iPads. So everyone that comes into the gala in black tie is given an iPad with the name of their person and their name. So it would say, Scott is here for Tedessi. Yeah. And we matched up old men with old men in the village, pregnant women with pregnant women in the village, couples up with couples in the village. So everybody comes in, and all the iPads are locked, so we serve dinner, and then after dinner, we give everyone the password, and for the next few minutes, they experience their person. And everybody is different. Yours is different than your wife's, and mine is different than my wife's. And at the end of that, I get up and say, a lot of you came to give a lot more tonight. I know there's incredibly generous people in the room. The tickets were a couple $1,000s, and the tables were expensive. But I said, would you give your person clean water, because it's only going to cost $30? And we handed out these Kindles, 400 Kindles, which were wired to a huge screen, and all 400 faces were up in black and white. By the way, this was not easy to do. Speaking of technology. Yeah, really. So everyone has 400 personalized iPads, and then the giving device goes out. And there's just a button that says, I'll give $30. As you give $30, the face of your person went from black and white to color. So, of course, everyone gives. Now, it's 10:05 p.m. in New York City at this point, and we had this huge surprise, and we weren't sure if it was going to work, but I had sent the creative team back to that same village with the drilling rig and a ton of hi-fi satellite equipment that like CNN and Fox uses. And I say to the audience, you're about to see what you just did. So it's 6 in the morning, and the sun is just coming up, and we open up a live satellite feed, and the same 400 people are standing around a drilling rig, and the drilling rig has been drilling through the night, and they get to watch water shooting out of the ground, and people just lose it. People are weeping. They were, and then we handed the device out again and said, now give generously. We raised $3.1 million. So, all that, the interesting thing about that and just the risk that took, we did 10 satellite tests, and 5 of them failed completely. We had equipment failure. Sometimes we just couldn't connect to the satellites. So the test that I had done in the Metropolitan Museum that afternoon was a complete dud. There was no backup plan. Imagine after all that, like standing on stage saying, and let's open up the feed to Ethiopia, and there's nothing there. And that was a total possibility.
Yeah.
But I think, I really don't know what we would have said. And I don't know how much that would have cost us. $1 million, $2 million?
Yeah.
No idea. But you have to take risks.
Yeah. And sometimes they pay off, right? That's good.
Sometimes they pay off.
Yeah. So one of the things I love about being with you here and before is just it is clear that you are someone who lives out of like purpose, right? Like you clearly have a passion and a purpose, behind your life. And but that started obviously with being in a place where you didn't have purpose, and you hinted at it in the video.
Different purpose.
Yeah, right, fair enough. You hinted at it in the video. You said, well, there was this kind of long decline, as you were going into Punta del Este, right? Before that, you had gone through this long decline. I'd just be interested to hear more, because you went through that, but your friends, presumably didn't, right? And so what was that like, right? As you're thinking about, okay, I'm in a certain life with a certain purpose, and what was it that drove you to get to that place where you said, actually, the music has to stop?
I think because of the way I was brought up, the whole decade was really a betrayal of my childhood, of the foundation. It's probably most similar to the prodigal son story. I mean, I gave everybody the finger, and I went off and slept with the proverbial prostitutes and and wound up in kind of like the pig pen, but not in the, not a sense of broke, but just like what a disgusting mess I've made of my life. I hate myself. I'm not honest. I do coke at 4 a.m. Like I remember once, I remember this very vivid moment where it was noon, and I was still up. And I looked out, we were partying, from the night before. I was in Soho on Houston Street. And I look out of the window, and people are going to lunch, like in suits. And, we'd been up from the night before, and it just felt so disgusting, like so unhealthy. So there was just this, like, I don't know, like I was almost being eaten away by my own selfishness and hedonism. So this moment in Punta del Este, I think, was a great moment because it didn't get any better than that. I think I needed that glimpse of this is how it plays out, because we were with richer people, with, I just realized that there would never be enough. Yeah. There would never be enough girls. There would never be enough money. There would never be enough parties. Someone would always be richer, would always have a nicer house, would always have a nicer car, would have a plane, or a nicer plane if I ever got there. And it was this endless pursuit of more, but the more was just pure selfishness. It was only what we could do for ourselves. And, my parents had been praying for 10 years. They had been really constant in my life, and they had little old ladies at the church, like wearing, holes in the carpet with their knees for many years. And my dad had sent this book of kind of deep theology down on this trip with me, and I never read anything he sent me, but I did. It was called The Pursuit of God, and I remember reading it hungover, and I was reading the exact opposite of my life. Yeah. So, it was a book written about the pursuit of holiness and integrity and virtue and understanding God and knowing God. And, there was just something about the extremity, I think, of this that I wanted it. I wanted that, and that would have been coming home because I had that growing up. So I come back to New York, and I'm just kind of bummed now because I feel guilty about living with my girlfriend, and I feel guilty about doing drugs, and I feel guilty about, I hate all the church words, but it was something had really changed. There was a shift in conviction, and I just kind of struggled, and I flailed for 5 or 6 months, really, and then finally had this moment where I said, I'm out of here. I rented a car, I drove north aimlessly. I drove through Vermont and Connecticut, and I was talking to God. I was drinking. I was reading the Bible. It was all very, very kind of...
A lot at once, yeah.
A lot at once. the Bible and the bottle of Dewar's and the pack of cigarettes. And I wound up in Maine at a dial-up internet cafe on Moosehead Lake. And I remember that's where I filled out the applications and said, I'm going to go. I'm going to give a year of the 10 and see where that takes me. Yeah. And it took me, on this incredible journey. And I also, I really quit everything. I felt like I would have to give up all the vices in one fell swoop to fully live out the new story for my life. Yeah. And I kind of felt, again, this is a churchy word, but like there would be, if I did it in a messy way, there would be grace for that, but I would only be hurting myself. Like it would be much easier to just make a clean break and never smoke again and never touch drugs again and never look at porn again and just like swear off everything in one go and kind of allow myself to step into this new. And then it was amazing. And I was with these unbelievable Christian doctors who were living out their faith in the most authentic way. Yeah. Dr. Gary was a plastic surgeon in California. Like the dude could be in Maldives, vacationing at the Four Seasons with his family. Yeah. He's given now 30 years. So it was inspiring to be with those people, and I wanted to be like them.
Yeah, so love it. When I'm sure you get this a lot because I'm sure you have this, you tell this story, and I'm sure that there are people who say, wow, like I may not be a nightclub promoter, but man, I understand what you're talking about in terms of feeling an emptiness. And then they say, I'm sure the next thing that you get is, okay, so do I need to go and spend $500 a month and like put myself on a ship and go, down the west coast of Africa? Like, what do you say to people when they say, okay, like, what's the next step? I know this isn't it, and what's the next step?
So I actually think some people do.
Some people need to do that.
And now being at it for so long, I know that is a response that some people have had to our story and to other stories, and it's actually worked out well for them because a lot of people are in jobs that they hate. I mean, a lot of people, come up to me afterwards and like, I just hate my job, and I hate kind of I'm just a part of the American dream, but I don't know that it's the American dream anymore, and someone's always going to have a bigger house. I mean, their own much more sane version of what I was chasing. So I think some people need to get out, and maybe it's not go start a charity or go, volunteer, but, sometimes it is a nice break, the gap year at 34 or 56, to go and open yourself up to another experience, and maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's, I think for the people that don't need to do that, for me it was very positional. You're either serving others or you're serving yourself. And if my entire life was set up to serve only me. Every decision that I made was run through the filter of, is this good for me? And I think a lot of people live their lives that way. Yeah. So if you can shift that positionally to, is this good for others? Will this benefit the poor? Will it benefit the people in my life, my coworkers, my family? In service, there's a real freedom. Mm-hmm. And, what we're really doing at Charity Water is, the vision is to reinvent charity. I mean, the vision is all of this soft stuff around compassion and empathy and radical generosity. It's all movement stuff. Water just happens to be a really good way to help people practically to eliminate some of the suffering in the world. And it's also universal, and everybody can agree on it. But what we're really after is trying to move people and to shift them and get them addicted to giving, and get them addicted to giving of their time, of their talent, of their money. The more you give, the more you want to give. Yeah. It's really true. But some people just never allow themselves that experience. They're so busy giving of themselves, giving to themselves. Yeah.
When you started Charity Water, you were single, right? You'd come back, you were single, and since then you've, of course, as you highlight in the video, right? So it's now you and your wife, and now your baby on the way is now a baby in your house, right? And how has that made you think about or rethink about your priorities? Like, how do you think about your priorities now?
There's a lot there. I mean, first of all, you immediately start thinking about the lives that your kids are going to live. I did a birthday campaign for Jackson. He had no choice, but he came into the world, and I was really intentional about, instead of gifts, what if his life, being born into a middle-class family, where he would never have to drink dirty water as long as he lived, and he probably would never have to go hungry or not have a roof over his head or be trafficked or any of these things facing a billion people worldwide. And I wanted his life, from the moment he was born, to start impacting other people's lives and to actually create a legacy for him. So it's interesting. I raise a lot with my birthdays every year, and we know a lot of donors at this point. But that idea was so catalytic. His birth campaign raised $250,000. As so many people just gave. They love the idea, like to welcome a child and have that birth. He helped 7,800 people in Niger get clean water. So, I'm thinking of taking him one day when he's old enough to understand, to meet those people, many of them who would have had kids, the same age that are growing up now with clean water. So I'm thinking so much more about that. The travel has changed. I mean, before Jackson was born, I did 96 flights that year. So that's like a plane every 3.5 days. I've cut that way back. I try and bring them with me a lot. I've optimized my whole life in New York City around the family when I'm there. So we live in a 940 square foot, 1-bedroom with 2 kids, but it's 8 blocks from the office. I could have a house. I mean, they pay me enough that I could go an hour outside New York and have a 4-bedroom house with a yard. But then I would have to get up at 6 in the morning and commute in for an hour and a half every day, and then I'd be home at 7. So when I'm home, I would much, much rather be home, and I see the kids in the morning and at night. And we just have a tiny little apartment. So that's kind of the trade-off. So there's a lot of, there are a lot of those little things. And then you see kids differently. As a dad, as I'm walking through these villages, you imagine your child is that child. I was with a mom in Niger last year in the Sahel Desert, and she told me that she'd lost 8 children. And she named them all, and she gave me all their ages. And 2 survived, and she'd fallen down the well with one of the 2. So one of the children was disabled. And, that means more to you as a parent. I mean, I can't imagine the pain of losing one child. Yeah. Imagine doing that 8 times. How she was even talking to me. Yeah. I can't even imagine that kind of grief. Yeah. So that's different as a parent than just the idea of being a parent.
Sure.
And that love that obviously, we feel as parents. I mean, it opens you up in a completely new capacity.
Yeah. So we're going to open it up for questions from others here in a minute, but I have like 1 or 2 other questions first. And one of them is, so we're here in Seattle, right? And the odds then are really good that there are a lot of people who are sitting here who may not even know a Christian, or if they do, they actually don't know anyone who they consider credible, right? If they do. And I'd just be interested to hear, like, how would you, as someone who at least I think is credible, like, how would you describe your faith and what it means?
I think I would start by saying that I was very intentional 10 years ago about separating my personal faith from the organization. And, I had a much big, so I felt like I would be able to live my personal faith and values out through the organization, but I didn't want it to be exclusionary. And I didn't want you to have to do what I did on a Sunday, to either work at the organization or give to the organization or be a beneficiary of the organization or, believe what I believe. So I kind of keep theology. I mean, I had a radical encounter. I mean, everything in my life changed when I came back to, my very Christian faith. And I think I've always kept my theology pretty simple. The verse that was just such a driver for me for years was in James. It says to look after true religion is this: to look after widows and orphans in their distress, and to keep yourself by being polluted. I was 0 for 2. I mean, for 10 years, I hadn't done a single thing for widows and orphans, and I literally polluted the world for a living. So I kind of thought about, I get to live out my work by serving the poor, and I get to work on my personal values and, unpollute myself. So let's start there. And I mean, I could tell you guys there have been miracles. I mean, there have been things that we have prayed for that like have, I mean, almost fallen out of the sky. I mean, my faith over the last 10 years would look like this. I mean, you know, I mean, there are stories that are more radical than a stranger walking in and giving $1 million. But I wanted to create a very big tent, and I get so excited when Muslim school kids during Ramadan send in $60,000 from Dubai.
Yeah.
And when Jewish synagogues write letters saying this is the first non-Jewish organization we have ever supported in the history, you should know that, but the values are so important, you know, and they're shared values. Yeah. So maybe 15% of the people at Charity Water would do what I do on a Sunday, maybe 20, and that's so exciting to me. Yeah. So I get to live, you know, a faith that is the most important thing in my life out, but I don't need to, the organization doesn't have any agenda other than to help people get clean water. And in what I believe about heaven, like nobody is drinking that disgusting water in heaven. No kids are walking 5 hours with 40 pounds of dirty water on their back. So that's kind of enough for me, you know, in the work. And then, you know, how I live my life, I better live out the faith that that I profess in my family and in the way that I am as a dad and as a husband and the way that I lead, and that's important to me too.
Yeah, good. Well, why don't we go ahead? I'm sure there are a bunch of questions out here in the audience, and want to make sure we have time for those. So if you have one, if you raise your hand, I'm sure we'll get a microphone to you.
Hi, Scott. I'm Frazier. Question for you: when you're looking to spend money on something that's not a clean water well, like your VR headset story, which is awesome, how do you make that decision about what to spring for, how much to spend on something that, you know, may or may not work, and it's a marketing thing, and how fast and far to push that?
We're really cheap. So the 100% model allows us to be cheap. So with this 2 bank account model, you know, a VR film these days costs about $1 million. I think we did ours for under $100,000, and I didn't want to pay for it, so I we else to pay for it. Our office in New York, we just moved into 22,000 square feet in prime real estate in Tribeca. We have an unbelievable lease because I took the landlord to Ethiopia, and I wanted him to catch the vision. And then I didn't want to pay $1.7 million for our build-out, so I had the landlord bring in the construction crew and the plumbers, and I gave them a presentation. And then they started donating their fees, and then the architect donated back his fees. And then I called Samsung, and they donated $50,000 of TVs for the office. And we called WeWork, and they started donating furniture for the office. And $1.2 million of the 1.7 was donated. So we still, even at our size, are asking. I mean, we ask for software that would cost us $1,000 a year for free. We're just cheap. But I like paying people really well. So we have a 401k, which we match. I mean, we pay above market for nonprofits in New York City. So I'd rather that the money go to people as we have it, and we've been very fortunate that you know, these 117 families that support all the overhead have actually been growing, and the interest in funding the unsexy stuff has been growing. So, you know, my first thing is, like, if I want to do something like that, my CFO always says there's never money for this stuff. So he'll say, "Well, go and find the money if you want to do it," and we do.
That's great. Thank you.
And if you ask, I mean, think of all the foundations in the world that would have loved to fund our VR film, right? If you look at it that way, everybody wants to be a part of experimenting with something new that could make an impact. And companies want to give. You know, asking Samsung for TVs is so much more interesting than money. You know, or asking software companies to donate their software is more interesting than money. I mean, they put their entire lives into what they make, and if the thing that they make can be used in the service of others, you're doing them a favor. You know, you're allowing their company to have a part of your mission.
What do you think the next big technology is for sharing stories?
That's a great question. I actually don't know. I really don't know. What I'm worried about is that we're getting so distracted and fragmented at the moment. I used to be able to make 3-minute YouTube videos and move people to action, and it just doesn't work anymore. I mean, that's why we made that thing 20 minutes. And, a lot of people won't watch it online, but I'm actually moving kind of the other way. I think public speaking, I think getting people in a room, I think creating a sense of community and in-person experiential museums, exhibitions, things that people can touch and I don't know, but I don't think it's anything that's out there right now. And I don't know that it's technology that's driving stories. I don't know that it's, a new pair of glasses from Snapchat or AI or any of that stuff. I think people miss like sitting around a campfire listening to people tell stories. I mean, I was in the movies the other day and I was sitting kind of towards the back. There were 40 people on their phone. You've seen this, right? People pull out their phones, they're emailing in the middle of a movie. Like, you know how big the screen is? Like Dolby, THX. Like IMAX can't hold people anymore. So I think, part of that is something that's really scary about society and our brains and our attention spans. So I kind of tend to go the other way, thinking about what's going to work or what's going to be most effective in the future.
Hi, I actually have 2 questions. So the first one is when you say clean water, there's a lot of assumptions associated with that. I should also clarify, I am a civil engineer that works with drinking water, and I know you're not, so I'm not going to ask you for detail, but when I think about charity and water, one of the things that always comes up for me is Bangladesh. For a long time, it was let's drill wells, let's get everybody off the surface water, and then it turns out that the drilled wells have arsenic in it. And so you just postpone the public health issues. So if you could talk a little bit about the wells that you drill and what kind of tests are associated with that. And then 2, water poverty is not just a third world country issue anymore. We're seeing that more and more here in the United States. So I was wondering if you could talk about what you think for your company or for your charity here in the United States.
Great questions. On the first, so wells are one of 14 different solutions that we employ across the portfolio. And the local partners really lead that. So in Bangladesh, it's interesting. I've been there a bunch of times. We did pond sand filters. So we did these huge, we took the surface water and we would clean it through chambers. They, as you drive through Bangladesh, as you know, you see a bunch of wells with the X's on them. They've gotten on top of that, so they're testing water. So every well that we would ever drill gets tested, and they don't all work. We had a bunch of wells in Kenya that we just had to shut down because of fluoride issues. So there's a bunch of different issues, whether it's fluoride, whether it's arsenic, in different regions. So the solutions would range from $700,000 gravity-fed systems in Rwanda that we're doing to rainwater harvesting systems in Rajasthan because we can't drill because of the water's saline, to we fund the biggest biosand filter program in the world in Cambodia, which are $65 household filters. We just did a 8-year retro study, and 98% of the filters were being used properly 8 years later. So there's a whole team that works on that. That's about a $3 million cost center at Charity Water of 19 people whose entire job, and they're the water experts. So they're flying around with clipboards, testing water, auditing, making sure the money's being spent. So I'd love for you to talk to them if you ever come to New York. They're much smarter about that stuff than I am. When it comes to stuff like Flint, we looked at that, and our mission has been very focused on rural water supply, so we don't work in urban or peri-urban. Of the 663 million people without water, 80% of them live in rural areas. So there's a lot of work to be done there. We did some early urban projects that just were disasters. Liberian slums, everything was vandalized. We didn't understand it. We didn't find any partners with a proficiency of working sustainably in urban environments, so we decided to focus on rural. We avoided conflict zones. We were too young of an organization to be working in South Sudan or DRC Congo at the time, and then we avoided governments that didn't want us. So that left us a lot of countries to be able to work in. When it came to like Flint, our team actually looked at it and just, we don't add any value. We don't know anything about huge billion-dollar public infrastructure. Wells aren't the answer to drill wells in backyards of people in Flint. It's advocacy that's needed. It's very political. So we just kind of said we don't have any of the core proficiencies. We did a blog post and we put it on our social media and we recommended 6 or 7 local organizations, that people could vet. The same thing, we've heard of these pockets in Appalachia where you might have a couple communities. The thing I will say, when we've investigated any of that, it's not that they're drinking dirty water, though. They're all going to the 7-Eleven to fill up buckets with clean water, from the hose outside. So it's not, in some ways, it's so different than what you see in Ethiopia, in Bolivia, in Rajasthan, India. So I think just if the right situation, I think we'll look at it. I think I'd probably see us get into an extension of water in rural water supply that would have to do with agriculture or livestock before we would take on domestic issues or kind of build that functionality. I am always struggling because I don't know who to send people to because I get the question a lot. So there was like one awesome charity here that drew a circle around the 72,000 people in America that didn't have clean water and had a solution for them. I think I could send them a lot of business. But I haven't found that yet. So if you know anybody, let me know. Front row always gets ignored.
He'll be back.
Hi, just a question. What creative charitable idea do you wish somebody would do now?
That's a great question. It's not another website. It's not another company or another marketplace that tries to get charitable goods that give to like charities together, because none of that stuff works. I think it's an idea that we don't have yet. We're really trying to reinvent the subscription business. So what is the new thing? If sponsor a child was the old thing, millennials aren't really sponsoring children. Why is that? I think there's a lack of trust in the system. Is that really my kid? $38 a month, it's like too perfect. It only costs $38 a month for every month in that child's life cycle for 8 years. It's just not a product that young people are buying. But yet, millennials are buying subscription products like crazy. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, Apple Music, New York Times, New Yorker Magazine, right? A millennial might have 7 to 10 different subscriptions. So that's what we're really trying to reinvent at the moment is what would we give people? We don't have a child that can write them, right? The money is actually fractionally going to a bunch of different countries to fund a wide variety of solutions that might cost $65 or $700,000 or $61 a person or $29 a person, and that's always in flux. So what does that experience look like that would get someone to give $30 a month, $50 a month for a long time? So I wish that someone would solve that, and then I could do that. And that's what we're working on. So we launched. So this video, you guys saw the alternate ending. The actual video we released online made a very clear ask at the end of this for people to join a new giving community called The Spring at $30 a month, and kind of anchored there. And we got about 6,600 people. So we realized that the key to our success over the next 10 years, we're too big to start at 0 every January 1. So we need to build this community of people who can give a little bit every single month, that we can talk to, that we can share stories with, that we can kind of bring along with us, but we're not quite sure what that experience is yet.
Like on top of water, like what practical
Oh, practical
need.
need.
Do you want
Oh,
us to see?
so that was the idea with the colon, was going to be charity education, charity shelter, charity health. I was actually interested in basic needs. If I was going to do something else, it would probably be hunger. Um, if I was going to do anything, it would have to be something that I could show a supporter, your money did this. So it has to have a tangible, physicality to it. So charity, the cure for cancer, wouldn't work for me. I can't take people's 10-year-olds' money selling lemonade to give it to people in labs that are looking for possible cures in test tubes. Just the way that my kind of brain works and the people that I'm trying to reach. It's a much more sophisticated donor, I think, that can give to that. So it would be shelter. I mean, I think people should have roofs over their head. I don't think people should be going to bed hungry. I don't think a woman should be losing 8 children. Some of them that could probably, that might have died of NTDs. Completely preventable diseases. So there's a lot of stuff I could get excited about. The nice thing about water is water touches education, it touches health, it touches the local economy. 52% of disease throughout the developing world, what other people would call the third world, 52% of disease is water and sanitation related. World Health Organization. So half of the sick people in all these countries where we are working are sick because of bad water and sanitation. So that's kind of the beauty of water and why we never strayed, because we started building water projects and toilets at schools. The toilets are more expensive than the water projects because the girls hit puberty, get their period, they stay home 4 or 5 days every month. If the school has no toilet, they fall behind in their studies. Culturally, a lot of these communities are saying, well, girls shouldn't be in school anyway. So they go back to walking for firewood or for water every day. So it is this really kind of core crux basic need that we've just been able to stay focused on and find all of these peripheral benefits.
For one more question. It's the last question.
You can ask it after. You can ask me directly.
Hi, do you work with other sister organizations like water.org? There are many of them like PATH who do lots of water projects.
Yeah, so the implementing is done through currently 13 implementing partners. So the money we raised for the water projects employs about 1,500 people now across the portfolio, working in 5 different states in India with 5 different local partners, for example. 600 people in Ethiopia, part of an indigenous organization called the Relief Society of Tigray that we've been working with for 9 years. The other NGOs that you guys might have heard of, water.org is a pretty big one. They do water credit, so it's a little different. They're working in urban and peri-urban, more than rural, and they're working with a slightly higher income level, kind of $3 to $5 a day. One of the things they do is they make loans to people so they can connect up to the municipality water source. So it's great work. It's a little different. Matt Damon's done an awesome job by showing up year in, year out, going to the projects. I mean, he's a great advocate for water. A lot of celebrities, will talk about a cause for about 3 months and then move on to the next one. So we have a lot of respect for their work. I think there needs to be more charity waters and more water.orgs, and I'd love to see some of these other much, much smaller organizations get to, a greater level of scale. I mean, we've got 663 million people out there. And we are not at a funding capacity yet. So Charity Water specifically has a 3x delta between the people we could help today and the money we're raising today. Not 10x, but 3x. So there's, the funding drives the capacity. So when we scaled up our Ethiopia program, we've now bought them 45 trucks. We've helped them hire 450 people over the last 9 years. We've bought them drilling rigs and helped them kind of build a new factory. So the funding drives more capacity, and right now there's not enough funding, and there's too much capacity.